I've mentioned on my channel a few times, but I was not a big fan of the Atari 2600. I just never connected well with its poor looking and sounding games that never ever did the arcade versions on which they were based proud. My father played the 2600 quite a bit in his time, but I always wanted to go to the actual arcade to get my gaming fix. I'd play the 2600 sporadically with family and friends, but as far as a machine I was passionate for, it simply wasn't for me. In fact, no home consoles at the time were. They were so far behind the technology that powered my favorite arcade games, it just wasn't the same experience. And that doesn't apply to just visuals and sound. Often the gameplay was gimped as well. And it was like that for most of my early life. Until 1986 rolled around and I got my first taste of the Nintendo Entertainment System. I had initially been introduced to the new platform by a classmate who invited me over to see his new toy. He had talked it up big, claiming arcade-level graphics and superior gameplay. I was skeptical, but sure wouldn't pass up my chance at checking out a new game system. What followed changed the course of gaming forever for me. In an instant, home consoles had gone from the dark ages to finally something worth playing. I played half a dozen games that day, every single one of them blowing me away. In this episode, we will be taking a look at my favorite Nintendo black box games. These were among the very first releases for the North American NES platform, and a group of games I'll never forget. American football video games had been pathetic in the early days, so could the NES turn it around with 10-Yard Fight? Well, kinda. While it certainly wasn't the best looking game, and it's guided by its own set of rules, this could still be a great time. The gameplay is simple, it has a 2-player mode, and at the time your options were quite limited. It put a heavy focus on the running game and had a load of different difficulties. Later games like Tecmo Bowl crushed it, but this one is still an early NES classic. Balloon Fight always gave me sort of a joust feeling. Here you gotta pop the balloons of your enemies and collect their dead corpse for score bonus. Watch out for those environment dangers though. Stuff like lightning and killer fish will try and take you out as well. There is also a side-scrolling game where you must collect balloons while avoiding obstacles. This one isn't half bad if you're a fan of single-screen combat games, and the multiplayer can keep a group of retro gamers busy for hours. It's a good one to play with your kids as well. I enjoyed baseball on the NES overall. The pitching and batting game is actually not bad, and can make for some great times with a friend. It's brought down quite a bit by the outfield play, however. It's slow and inaccurate, making some basic hits frustrating to recover. It can often have a profound effect on a close game, causing you to lose on a simple play that your guy runs right past 3 times before he actually picks up the damn ball. I still played the heck out of it though, and just hearing the sound effects makes me all warm and fuzzy inside. Oh man, did I love the NES port of Donkey Kong. Nintendo freaking nailed the arcade feel. The stages are there, the gameplay feels right, and it's just an overall excellent game. I could play it for hours without a second thought. It was the first time I had ever seen a game at home that could actually stand up to its arcade counterpart. It sounded great too. I always appreciated Golden Era games, and playing this on the NES was a watershed moment for me in the hobby. At just 11 years old, I wanted the NES more than I had ever wanted anything else in my life. Donkey Kong Jr. kept things strong in the series and again nails the feel of the arcade original. You get more stages and more interesting gameplay. I was just as taken with this one as I was the first. You just had to love that you could defeat the main good guy from the first one as well. Nintendo didn't make their Mario-type characters bad guys very often, so it was nice to have the option of defeating him. It's a black box winner. Nintendo wasn't without some cool racing games, and Excite Bike here is a classic. It's done like motocross dirt bike racing, and has you navigating courses with small and large jumps, mud holes, and grass. Keep a watch on your temperature gauge though, because it'll ruin everything if you overheat. There was even a track editor where you could build your own races. Every kid loved motorcycles, BMX bikes, or both, so this one has a lot of appeal for many of you. I have friends that loved it so much, they were still playing it when Mario 3 came out. I spent quite a bit of time playing Kung Fu Master in the arcade, so seeing it on the NES was quite exciting. While the visuals were cut back a tad, they really captured the feel of the gameplay. It only has a handful of stages, but they get so progressively hard, you need a ton of practice to beat it. It doesn't just rehash the same two bad guys either. You'll face everything from snakes and dragons to dwarves and gunmen. There's some boss-like enemies as well. I always felt like this one was the granddaddy to games like Double Dragon, and having a home version of this quality was a heck of a good time. The very first Mario Bros. Game had been pretty popular in the arcade, but the previous home versions were just plain terrible. Nintendo made sure to do right by their creation on the old NES, however. This port is pretty close visually and plays just like it should. I always preferred this one in multiplayer, and highly advise you do the same if you have the means. While it was quickly overshadowed by other games featuring Peach's Errand Boy, it was still a good home version worth playing for fans of the arcade. Pinball is not a great digital recreation of the real thing, but it does have something going for it that few games ever had. It was something I could get my father to play with me when I was a kid. He didn't take well to much on the NES, instead preferring the simpler pleasures of his Atari 2600. He loved this one though, and getting that positive reinforcement from him made a big impression on me. I'd play it to beat his scores, and it was, for a time, as happy as I had ever been with my father. I adored Popeye in the arcade, man. It was simple, but the gameplay was really nice for a single screen style presentation. Basically, you are Popeye trying to save Olive Oyl from the flim-dip Bluto. You need to collect her hearts, musical notes, and letters in each stage to clear it and move on. There's other dangers scattered around the stage as well, but you do get spinach to even the odds. The arcade at my local cab station had this in the lobby for an entire year, so I got pretty good at it. Seeing it come home with the care to make sure the gameplay was intact was awesome, and I spent quite a bit of time with it. I've confessed my love for pro wrestling before, and I have no problems doing it again. When this was released, wrestling games on the US console market had been nothing short of appalling. This finally gave us some great pacing to the gameplay, moves that we saw each week on the TV, and some colorful characters with unique traits. I dumped hours and hours into it, finding new and unique ways to outsmart the CPU. Later games, of course, would come along and destroy it in graphics, gameplay, roster, and moves list, but at the time, you couldn't find a better game in the genre at home. You guys know I loved Sega Superscalar arcade games, so when I saw something similar at home, I just had to play it. Slalom was an incredibly smooth, forward-scrolling skiing game that, while simple, still was a great bit of fun for me. It was one of the earliest games I borrowed for my own NES in 1987, and I happily played the heck out of it for weeks. It was no Outrun or Space Harrier, but I certainly had never played anything like it at that point, at least visually. Most of the gameplay consisted of avoiding obstacles, but you can do tricks as well. Nintendo had a few early games with some cool software scaling, so check out Mach Rider as well. Like a lot of kids in North America, it was Super Mario Bros. That blew my socks off when I got a chance to play it. The varied game world, the fluid and impeccable gameplay, I mean playing this for the first time is something I'll never forget. It looked and sounded incredible as well, easily destroying any of the platform-style games I had played before it, including its own forebearer. It had hidden secrets and items everywhere, giving you loads of reason to keep playing long after you beat it. When I finally got my own NES, I spent many a night huddled in my room on my 13-inch black and white TV playing. It made such a profound mark on me, I still play it every couple of years start to finish without warp zones, just for the great memories it provided. Nostalgia powers a lot of our retro playing and collecting these days, but Super Mario Bros. Is just as fun now as it was 35 years ago. There we go guys, my favorite amongst the Nintendo Black Box games. There were of course many more than this overall. The first NES game I ever played was called Gyromite and used the robot that originally shipped with the unit Rob. There was Duck Hunt and its shooting action, and of course stuff like the previously mentioned Mach Rider. Not everything was great however. I hated games like Donkey Kong 3. I mean, how did we go from the greatness of the first two to shooting bees? And my god did I loathe Clu Clu Land. I borrowed this from a friend when he was trying to sell it to me for $10. I knew something was off and I'm sure glad I tried it before I bought it. Most of these games came out across late 1985 and early 1987, so of course the later deluge of third-party products completely overshadowed them for many NES owners. But I still remember that fateful day I went to my classmate's house after school to see the NES for the very first time. I stayed so long it was well after dark before I got back home, my furious mother waiting at the door. She was so pissed she grounded me and threw a shoe or two, but as I laid in bed that night thinking to myself, it was totally worth it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.